What is the difference between you and Daigo? Okay, more specifically, why is Daigo better at anti-airing than you are? Why is he able to keep the opponents out better than you do, and why is he able to defend better in general? No, it's not because he's better at performing the moves. You can only get so good at a flash kick and shoryukens, and plenty of way worse players are just as good as him at those moves. Simple. His trick? His ingrained reactions. In most situations, him and many other professional players do not have to think about what to do at all, because he knows the answer that always works. My opponent jumps, I do this. My opponent dashes, I do this, etc, etc. This lack of complex thought to deal with these situations leaves space in your working memory to apply to more complex situations. In this first lesson, we will learn some defensive tools and make a simple defensive game plan. This beginner level defensive game plan will ensure that we use each tool in it with intent, and by keeping this lesson more general in nature, we assure that it can be applied to many situations, in many games, against many different opponents. This lesson and most lessons that will follow won't be too focused on specific games, but will be more general in nature. That way, the concepts taught in these lessons will be applicable to most fighting games. However, there will be a specific exception for 3D fighters. If there is interest, I will be happy to make addendum videos for 3D fighters like Tekken, DOA, Soul Calibur, etc. Without further ado, this is FGC Checklist Lesson 1, Dealing with your opponent. In this lesson we'll be taking a look at blocking and other defensive tools, keep out moves and pokes, and the concept of taking turns in fighting games. All these things together will form a basic defensive game plan. Once we've covered these topics and are able to stop our opponent from overwhelming us with their game plan, we will move on to forming our own game plan in the next lesson. So, first things first, the best defense is a good defense. In any fighting game, there will come a time where the opponent gets up to our character and starts attacking us. What do we do against this? We learn to block. Most 2D fighting games have at least two types of blocking and prefer one way over the other. You are typically able to stand block by holding back away from your opponent or by pressing the block button in case it's there. Stand blocking blocks all high and mid attacks, as well as overheads such as jump-ins, but stand blocking loses against low attacks. You are also able to block low by inputting down back away from your opponent. This blocks all mid and low attacks, usually ducks high attacks, but you can still get hit by overhead attacks. Keep in mind that usually all types of blocking lose to being grabbed by the opponent. This brings us to the first part of our game plan. In 2D games, you typically want to block low. Why? Doing so will simplify your defensive game plan and therefore make it more effective. In general, you want to block low as long as your opponent is on the ground, as this will cover most of their options. The two options this doesn't cover will inform the rest of your defensive game plan. Blocking low doesn't cover overheads, nor throws and grabs, so how do we deal with those? Overheads can simply be blocked by stand blocking as long as you pay attention to your opponent, as you should have plenty of time to react and stand block. However, if we do this, we allow our opponents free entry and give them the chance to pressure us, which isn't ideal. So whenever possible, you want to respond to your opponent jumping in with an anti-air. This will deal some damage, which in turn will dissuade them from trying this too much. You most likely won't be able to react to every jump-in attempt and will notice that certain jump angles or certain jump-in attacks are more difficult to deal with than others. In general, you want to anti-air as much as possible. And for now, try to keep it simple by using anti-air buttons, not commands like dragon punches. We will discuss their usefulness later on. If you manage to keep them from jumping, the opponent will try to close the distance in another way. They will often do this by either walking or dashing towards you. As you don't want to just let them get in, you will want to try to keep them out. When the opponent is far away, you want to look for a move that travels very far and will be able to just hit them. The furthest move you have will be your max effective range. In case your character has a fireball or fireball-like move, you'll also be able to use that at ranges where your normal attacks don't hit. Next, you want to look for a move that is slightly faster than your longest range move, but has a little less range, to use when the opponent is a bit closer. And lastly, you want to find your fastest button, which you will use when your opponent is closest to you. Most games have light, medium and heavy attacks or something similar. Often these correspond to these ranges as well. These 3 to 4 options should become really natural to you, as you will use them depending on how far the other character is away from you. Finally, we come to when our opponent is right up on us and what we do then. While blocking, try to look for gaps in their offense, or try to see when their combo ends. This will allow you to take your turn. Much of knowing when it is your turn comes from familiarizing with the game and sometimes even learning frame data. We won't be covering this in this video. If you aren't sure when you can take your turn again, try to interrupt your opponent with your fastest button, and if it works, you found a gap in their offense, and if it doesn't, you'll know not to press that next time. Many games have options to push your opponent away whilst blocking. This is often referred to as a push block, and can be very useful to create some distance between you and your opponent. Though this might make it so they can't hit you anymore, you might not be able to punish them either, so use this option with care. It is unavoidable that at one point you will get hit. If this happens, just keep blocking, in case they mess up their combo. If you get knocked down, for now we will keep blocking whilst getting up, and try to take your turn after it wherever possible. If the opponent manages to corner you, you will want to jump out when possible, to avoid the pressure of being in the corner. So what have we learned so far? We block low when the opponent is on the ground, we anti-air when they jump in, we use the appropriate poke, depending on how far the opponent is to hit them. When the opponent is in, we use a fast attack to find holes in their offense to take our turn. We use push blocking, if available, to create more distance between us and our opponents. When we get knocked down, we block whilst getting up, and repeat the previous 2. And if we are in the corner, we want to jump out to avoid any unnecessary pressure. Whew, this is already a pretty long list, especially if it is all completely new. We want to try keeping things you have to actively keep in mind to a minimum to be more effective. Opponent on ground, I block crouching. Opponent jumping, I anti-air. Opponent far, I press my heavy button. Opponent close, I press my light button. And so on and so on. This concludes this lesson. In the next lesson, we'll move from blocking and keep out to the real deal fighting game as we start working on an offensive game plan. See you there.